He silenced her call, not because he didn't see her name, not because his hands were full, or the room was too loud, or the moment was wrong. He saw her name glowing on that screen, his pregnant wife, 39 weeks, scheduled for surgery that morning, and he pressed his thumb down until the screen went dark. That was the moment, that single deliberate choice. Not a car accident, not a medical emergency, not an enemy with a gun. Just a man at a party, deciding that whatever was happening on the other end of that call couldn't wait. Naya Caldwell King was already on the operating table. If you have ever been the person on the other end of a call that never gets answered, if you have ever needed someone and discovered in that silence exactly where you rank in their life, then you already know what this story costs. Subscribe to this channel and follow this story to the end. Hit the like button and drop your city and country in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Because what happens next between these two people is something you will not want to miss. The morning of October 14th began the way most mornings in the Kang household began, with Taejun already dressed and already thinking about something that had nothing to do with the person sleeping 3 feet away from him. Naya noticed this about him early in their marriage, the way he woke with his jaw already set, the way his eyes focused on the middle distance before they ever found her face. She used to tease him about it. She would wave her hand in front of his eyes and say, "Earth to the Empire, I'm right here." He would almost smile. Almost. She had stopped teasing him about it sometime around month 4 of trying to get pregnant, when the fertility specialist visits and the blood draws and the quiet, grinding disappointment of another negative test had made her feel like her body was a problem to be solved rather than a woman to be loved. That was when she first began to understand that Kang Tae-jun loved her genuinely deeply, in whatever language he had available to him, but that love for him had always lived in the peripheral. Something he was certain of and therefore stopped actively tending. She was 31 years old on the morning of October 14th. She had a bag packed and waiting by the bedroom door. Her OB-GYN had scheduled the C-section for 10 in the morning after a monitoring appointment showed her blood pressure climbing in a direction nobody wanted. Not dangerous yet, but close enough that nobody was willing to roll dice with a full-term baby involved. Tae-jun had known about this appointment for 11 days. He had it in his phone. He had it written on the notepad on his nightstand in his own handwriting, because Naya had made him write it there herself, had handed him the pen, had watched his hand move across the paper. October 14, surgery 10 a.m. St. Raphael's, be there. She watched him that morning from across the room while he knotted his tie and checked his watch and reached for his phone with the unconscious efficiency of a man whose first language was motion. He moved through a room the way water moved through a pipe, purposefully, without resistance, without looking at the walls. "The driver's already downstairs," he said, not looking at her. "I want you at the hospital by 8. That gives us 2 hours before they prep you." "Us," she said. He looked up then. He caught something in her voice, not hostility exactly. More like the sound of a person reminding you they exist. "I'll be there by 9:30, he said. "I have one meeting I can't move. You said that last Tuesday. This is different. Every meeting is different." He came to her then, and he placed both hands on her face, and he looked at her with those dark, controlled eyes, and he said, "I will be there when they wheel you in. I promise you that." She looked at him for a long moment. She was enormous with their daughter, 39 weeks and 4 days, and her back ached constantly, and her ankles had been swollen since August. And she was terrified in the particular way that only people who have waited a very long time for something beautiful understand the terror of being this close and losing it. "Okay," she said. She believed him. That was the part she would turn over and over in the weeks that followed, the simple, devastating fact that she had believed him. The meeting Tae-jun could not move was with a man named Baek Do-hwan, a Korean underworld strategist who had been quietly buying influence inside the Mujin Alliance for 18 months without anyone in Tae-jun's circle noticing. The alliance was not a single organization. It was a coalition of 5 distinct East Coast syndicates, Korean, Chinese, Russian, Irish, and one hybrid crew out of Baltimore that defied easy categorization, all operating under a loose framework of territorial agreements and shared financial infrastructure. Town had helped build that framework. He sat at its center the way a spider sits at the center of a web, not because he controlled every thread, but because every thread eventually ran through him. Do-hwan had figured this out, and he had also figured out, with the cold patience of a man who planned in years rather than months, that the surest way to fracture Tae-jun's position was not to attack him directly. It was to make him look compromised, human, distracted, like a man whose judgment could no longer be trusted because his life had become complicated. What Tae-jun did not know, walking into that 9 o'clock meeting in a private room at the Park Meridian, was that Do-hwan had been planning this particular morning for 4 months. He knew about the baby. He knew about the surgery. He knew Tae-jun had made a promise, and he had spent 4 months building a crisis calibrated to arrive at exactly the wrong time. The meeting ran long. Meetings with Do-hwan always ran long, because the man never came to the actual point during the first 40 minutes. He circled it. He presented context. He offered history. He asked questions that seemed philosophical and were actually precise instruments designed to reveal how much you knew and how much you were willing to admit. By the time Tae-jun's phone buzzed with a text from his security chief, Park Min-sik, signaling that the financial irregularity Do-hwan had flagged was more serious than initially assessed. It was 8:47. Tae-jun glanced at the message, then he glanced at the time. He told himself he had until 9:15. He stayed. At 9:12, Nia's name appeared on his screen for the first time. Not a text, a call. He was mid-sentence. The two men sitting across from him were watching him with the particular attentiveness of people who knew exactly what that call was and exactly what his response to it would tell them about who he was. Do-hwan's face was perfectly still, carefully neutral. The way faces look when they are performing neutrality rather than feeling it. Tae-jun declined the call. He told himself he would call her back in 4 minutes. 5 at the most. He told himself she was probably just anxious, just checking his location, just needing to hear his voice before they put her under. He told himself there was nothing happening on the other end of that call that could not wait 4 minutes. He finished his sentence. The call came again at 9:17. This time, without thinking, without any of the conscious deliberation he would later claim he had exercised, Tae-jun simply silenced his phone and set it face down on the table. It was a reflex, the kind of thing a man does in a meeting when he needs to project control, when he needs the room to believe he is not divided. Across Manhattan, in a monitoring bay at St. Raphael's Medical Center, Nia's blood pressure spiked to a number that made her OBGYN stop smiling. They moved the surgery forward by 40 minutes. No one could reach Tae-jun. Nia had brought her mother, Grace Caldwell, because Grace was the kind of woman who showed up when it counted and did not take up more space than the situation required. Grace had been in the waiting room, reading a novel she wasn't actually absorbing, when a nurse came to find her and said the words "we need to move" in that particular clipped, professional tone that means we have passed the moment where waiting is still an option. Grace held Nia's hand in the prep room while Nia stared at the ceiling tiles and called Tae-jun's number 3 more times. Voicemail, voicemail, voicemail. "He'll come," Grace said, because she was Nia's mother and that was the only thing available to say. "I know," Nia said, because she was Nia's daughter, and that was the only thing available to believe. She was still believing it when they wheeled her through the double doors. The surgery itself was unremarkable, medically speaking. Her team was experienced, efficient, unhurried in the way that people who have done a thing thousands of times are unhurried. They moved with a kind of practiced calm that should have been reassuring, and instead felt isolating, because the calm in the room did not match the chaos inside Nia's chest. She could feel pressure, not pain exactly, the particular sensation of being worked on, of hands moving through a space that was somehow both her body and not her body. She kept her eyes on the ceiling. She did not cry until they lifted Maya up over the drape. Maya Kang arrived in the world at 9:51 in the morning, 6 pounds and 14 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and the specific, outraged expression of someone who was not consulted about this transition and has opinions about it. The nurses brought her around immediately, still pink and furious, and ancient-looking the way all newborns are ancient-looking, and placed her against Nia's cheek. Nia said her daughter's name out loud for the first time. She said it quietly, like a thing she had been holding in her mouth for months and was finally allowed to release. And then, because she was alone and the feeling in her chest was too large to contain, she cried. Not the performative crying of relief, but something deeper and more complicated, the crying of a woman who had just done the most terrifying and significant thing of her life, while the one person who promised to be there was somewhere else with his phone face down, finishing a sentence. Grace took a photograph from across the room. Nia in the hospital bed, hair damp, eyes red, face exhausted and open, in a way that the camera almost shouldn't have been allowed to see. Maya against her chest, tiny and dark-haired and perfect. The space beside Nia on the left side of the frame, the space where a husband would stand, where a father would lean in, where a man who had made a promise would be, was empty. Grace showed Nia the photograph later that evening. Nia looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "Keep it. Taejun arrived at the hospital at 11:47. He had learned what happened from Min-sek, who had gotten a call from Grace's phone. Grace, who had no idea who Min-suk was, who had simply worked her way through Naya's recent calls until someone answered and told her where her son-in-law was. Min-suk had walked into the Park Meridian meeting room without knocking and had placed his hand over Taejun's phone on the table and said 4 words that ended the meeting instantly. The baby came early. Taejun moved through the hospital with the particular velocity of a man who is not running but whose body has decided that all social speed limits no longer apply. He was known here. His financial contribution to the neonatal unit had paid for 2 new monitoring stations the previous spring. And the staff stepped back slightly when they saw his face, the way people step back from weather. He found Naya in the recovery room. She was sitting up in the bed with Maya asleep against her arm. She looked at him when he came through the door. She looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before, not anger, not devastation, not the tearful confrontation he had braced himself for during the 40-minute drive. She looked at him like she was deciding something. "She's beautiful," he said. Because it was true, and because he had no other words available. "Yeah," Naya said, "she is." He came to the bed. He held out his arms toward Maya and Nia, without hesitation, transferred their daughter into them. He held Maya with a carefulness that surprised him, both hands underneath her, his face changing in a way that happened below his control. Something cracked open in his chest cavity. Something structural, something that had apparently been holding a great deal of weight without his knowledge. He pressed his lips against Maya's hair and closed his eyes for a moment. Then he looked at Naya and started to speak. "Don't," she said quietly. Not harshly, not with the hard edge of a woman who wants a fight. "Just don't, not tonight, not in this room." He stopped. He stood there holding his daughter and understanding. Perhaps for the first time, that silence was not always a form of control. Sometimes it was the only honest response to a thing you could not fix with words. "Okay," he said. He sat down in the chair beside her bed, still holding Maya. They did not speak for a very long time. Outside the hospital, October was doing what October does in New York, golden gray and cold, in the way that makes you feel like something is ending. The city moved at its usual velocity, indifferent, enormous, full of people who had no idea that somewhere on the 4th floor of St. Raphael's Medical Center, a marriage was quietly taking its first step toward a cliff neither person inside it could yet see. Taejun watched his daughter sleep. Nia watched Taejun. She had loved him. She still loved him. She had loved the stillness in him that first night in the hospital corridor 4 years ago, loved the way he had simply sat beside her without trying to manage her grief or offer solutions or fill the silence with himself. She had thought that stillness was a form of presence. She was only now beginning to understand that there were 2 kinds of stillness. There was the stillness that stays, and there was the stillness that simply hasn't left yet. She pulled her blanket higher and looked away. Tomorrow she would deal with what today had cost her. Tonight she was going to let herself be exhausted, and small, and human, in the room where her daughter had just arrived in the world. Tomorrow would come soon enough. The morning after Maya was born, Taejun did not go home. He sat in that hospital chair until the sky outside the window went from black to gray to the particular pale gold of early morning that nobody who has slept through the night ever sees. He sat with Maya against his chest for 2 hours, while Nia slept, and he watched his daughter's face the way a man watches something he does not yet have the vocabulary to describe. Her eyelids were thin as paper, her fingers curled and uncurled in her sleep like she was practicing for something. Her breath came in small, uneven rhythms that made his chest tighten every time there was a pause between them. He had faced men with guns. He had sat across tables from people who wanted him dead and had eaten his food and finished his coffee and looked back at them without blinking. A 6-pound infant was dismantling him completely. Around 5 in the morning, Naya stirred. She did not open her eyes immediately. She lay there for a moment with her face turned toward the window, and Taejun watched the exact moment she remembered where she was, and what had happened. He could see it move through her body, a kind of tightening, a gathering of something that had been scattered during sleep. She turned her head and looked at him. He was still holding Maya. She looked at the baby first, checked her the way new mothers check a rapid, instinctive inventory. Then she looked at Taejun's face, and whatever she found there, she kept to herself. "You should go home," she said. Her voice was rough from sleep and from the crying she had done the night before, though she would not have admitted to the crying if he had asked. "I'm fine here. I didn't say you weren't fine. I said you should go home." A beat passed between them. He understood she was not asking because she was concerned about his rest. She was asking because she needed the room to herself. because she needed space in which to think without him, sitting 4 feet away, being the thing she needed to think about. He stood carefully so he didn't disturb Maya and transferred her back to the bassinet beside the bed. He pulled the blanket up, smoothed the edge of it with one finger. Then he picked up his jacket and walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. He did not turn around. "I should have been here," he said. Nia looked at the ceiling. "Yeah," she said. "You should have." He left. The photograph went viral on the 3rd day. Nobody in Taejun's circle saw it coming, which was itself a significant failure of intelligence, because the image had been lived for almost 6 hours before Min-sik brought it to Taejun's attention. 6 hours, during which it had accumulated enough momentum that stopping it was no longer a realistic option. The photograph showed the interior of a private room at a Mujin Alliance gala event held the night of October 13th, the night before Maya was born, the night of the meeting that had run into the following morning. In the photograph, Taejun stood close to a woman named Seo Hye-rin, his Korean-American political strategist, a woman whose job was to make sure Taejun's name never appeared in the wrong kind of publication. She was 36, precise in the way expensive things are precise, and she had worked for him for 3 years. In the photograph, they were laughing. Not the formal laugh of a professional event, but something more relaxed, more private, his head tilted toward hers, her hand touching his arm at the elbow. The caption that accompanied it, posted by an anonymous account with no prior history and no followers who had since been deleted, read, "While his black wife gave birth alone, the Korean mob boss spent the night with his mistress." By the time Min-sik showed Taejun the screen, the phrase "mob boss mistress" was trending. Taejun read the caption twice. His face did not change. Min-sik had worked for this man for 9 years and had learned to read the quality of his stillness the way a Marine reads weather. This particular stillness was not calm. It was the stillness of a man deciding which problem to address first, and in what order. "Where did it come from?" Taejun asked. "Anonymous account. Already deleted. But the image is real. Someone inside the gala took it. And someone with media contacts got it to 3 outlets simultaneously." Hye-rin. Min-sik paused. "We don't have confirmation yet." It was Hye-rin. Not a question, not even particularly emotional. Just a man identifying the origin point of a problem with the same flat efficiency he brought to everything. "I need to get ahead of this before Naya sees it," Taejun said. Min-sik looked at him for a moment. She may have already seen it. She had. Naya's college roommate, Dominique, had sent the link at 6:47 in the morning with the text that read, "Please tell me this is not what it looks like, and I'm going to need you to call me." Naya had been feeding Maya when the notification came in. She had read it with Maya latched and the morning news playing quietly on the hospital room television, and she had clicked the link with one hand, and she had read the caption, and she had looked at the photograph for a long time. The interesting thing, the thing she would not be able to explain to people later, the thing that would make her mother shake her head and her friends look at her sideways, was that her first feeling was not devastation. It was clarity, because Nia knew Taejun. She knew him in the specific, unglamorous way that people know each other after 3 years of sharing a bathroom and a bed, and the particular low-grade friction of 2 strong personalities occupying the same domestic space. She knew his tells. She knew what guilt looked like on his face, and what control looked like, and what genuine feeling looked like. And the man who had sat in that chair all night holding their daughter had not been a man in the middle of an affair. He had been a man in the middle of a reckoning. So the affair she did not believe. Photographed Taejun laughing, relaxed, his head tilted toward another woman's, while Naya was in a hospital bed waiting for him. That was real. The gala was real. The fact that he had been there, at a party, comfortable enough to laugh like that, while she was calling his phone and getting voicemail, that was real. She closed the link. She looked at Maya. "Okay," she said quietly. To herself, to her daughter. To the particular silence of a decision not yet made but already beginning to form. Taejun arrived at the hospital at 8:15. Nia knew he was coming because Dominique had texted again to say she'd seen a car matching Taejun's security detail pulling up outside, and Dominique had a detailed and somewhat alarming knowledge of Taejun's vehicles that Nia had never questioned. She had Maya in her arms, and she was sitting up in bed, and her face was arranged in an expression that gave away exactly nothing when he came through the door. He stopped when he saw her face. He had his phone in his hand. He had clearly been mid-crisis management. When he walked in, she could see it in the tension across his shoulders, the particular distraction of a man fielding 17 problems simultaneously. "You saw it," he said. "I saw it. It isn't what it looks like." "I know," he blinked. That was not the response he had prepared for. "You know, I know you're not sleeping with Hye-rin, Taejun. I know that's not what was happening." She shifted Maya slightly. That's not actually what I'm upset about. He moved into the room. He sat down in the same chair he'd occupied all night, which somehow made this worse, the familiarity of it, the fact that the chair was still angled the way he'd left it. Then tell me what you're upset about. You were at a party. Her voice was even, measured, not cold, exactly more like a woman who has decided that emotion is a currency she is not going to spend carelessly. You were at a party, laughing, and I was here calling you, and you didn't answer. That's the thing, not the woman, not the photograph. Just you were somewhere else, and I needed you. And you looked at my name on your phone, and you decided that whatever was happening in that room was more important. Silence. I didn't know the surgery had moved forward. You didn't know because you silenced your phone. The words landed in the room like something physical. Looked at her. His jaw was set and his eyes were very still. And she could see him doing the thing he always did when a conversation moved into territory he hadn't mapped in advance, the slight recalibration, the gathering of resources, the search for the angle from which he could manage this. Don't, she said. I'm not, you're about to explain. Can see it happening. She looked down at Maya for a moment, then back at him. I don't need an explanation. I need you to understand that the explanation is not actually the point. Then what is the point, Nia? The point is that you made a choice. And the choice told me something. She paused. I'm still figuring out exactly what it told me. But I know what it felt like. It felt like being ranked. He did not answer. Outside the room, the hospital moved through its morning with the blunt efficiency of a place that processes too much human experience to slow down for any individual piece of it. Carts rattled past in the hallway. A phone rang somewhere. Someone on the floor was having a very different morning. Someone was receiving news. Someone was being given good news. Someone's ordinary Tuesday was being restructured by something they hadn't anticipated. Tajan looked at his daughter, then at his wife. I'm going to fix the media situation, he said. It was the wrong thing to say. Nia's expression shifted by a fraction. Not enough that most people would have caught it, but Taejan caught it because he had been studying her face for 3 years, and because he was, at his core, a man who noticed things. The fraction of shift was not anger. It was something quieter and more final. It was the look of a woman crossing something off a list. Okay, she said, he left to fix the media situation. Hyrin did not deny it. Taejan had her brought to his private office in the building, on 47th Street, not the public-facing suite, but the room behind it, the one without windows, the one where conversations happened that were never recorded and never repeated. She came in wearing a gray coat and the expression of a woman who had done a calculated thing and was now performing composure while she waited to discover the cost. She sat down without being invited to. You released it, Taejan said. He was standing. He rarely sat in this room. Standing was a choice. The directness surprised him. He had expected maneuvering. Why? Because your marriage is a liability. She folded her hands in her lap. Her voice was professional, clipped the voice of someone delivering an analysis rather than a confession. You've been distracted for 14 months. The Alliance members have noticed. Duwan has been talking quietly, in the right ears about your judgment. About whether a man managing a difficult personal situation can be trusted to manage large-scale financial and territorial decisions without his personal life bleeding into his professional one. She paused. The photograph was meant to force a resolution. If Nia leaves publicly, the narrative becomes clean. You're not distracted by a difficult marriage. You're simply a man whose wife left. That's manageable. Taejan looked at her for a long time. You decided, he said slowly, that my wife's surgery, my daughter's birth, those were acceptable casualties of your strategic calculation. I decided, you decided, he said, his voice dropping by 2 registers, without asking me. You took my life, and you moved the pieces without asking me. The temperature in the room changed. Hyrin, who was not easily frightened, felt the change. She kept her face neutral, but her hands tightened slightly in her lap. I was trying to protect the Alliance, she said. You were trying to protect your position inside the Alliance, he said. There's a difference. Don't confuse them again, he told her. She was done. Not fired, done. The distinction, in his world, meant something different. And from the way the color shifted slightly at the edge of her jaw, she understood it. She left. Min-suk came in while Tae-jun was still standing in the same place, looking at the door she had closed behind her. There's something else, Min-suk said. Tae-jun turned. Min-suk had a tablet in his hand. He set it on the desk and turned it to face his employer. On the screen was a technical report, the kind generated by their security sweep team, dense with terminology that most people would need translated. But Tae-jun did not need it translated. We found a device, Min-suk said. In your study. behind the third panel from the left on the north wall, built into the infrastructure. It's been there long enough that it's become part of the wall. The dust patterns around it match the surrounding surface. Whoever placed it knew what they were doing and knew they had time. Tae-jun sat down. This was notable because he almost never sat in this room. Our best estimate is 16 to 18 months. 16 to 18 months. He calculated backward without meaning to. 16 months ago was the beginning of the fertility treatments. 16 months ago was when his personal life had started to require the kind of energy and attention that left less margin for everything else. 16 months ago was, he now understood, exactly when someone had decided to start listening. Song-ho, he said. Min-sik's expression confirmed it before he said the word. Choi Song-ho had been with him for 7 years, had eaten at his table, had stood at his shoulder during 3 separate incidents where standing at Tae-jun's shoulder had required a particular kind of physical courage, had been promoted twice, and trusted with the kind of information that was shared only with people you had decided on at the level below conscious thought were extensions of yourself. Where Ijun asked. We have him. Keep him. Min-suk nodded. He started to leave. He stopped. The hospital schedule, Tae-jun said. The surgery. Timing. He was working through it. While he spoke, the way he always worked through things out loud. Sequentially, building the structure as he went. Someone fed Doo-won's people the schedule. That's how they knew when to push the gala. That's how they knew when to manufacture the crisis, with the financial irregularity. They needed me in that room, visible, standing next to Hyrin at the exact moments. He stopped. Min-sik said nothing. They planned it around the birth, Tae-jun said. They used my daughter's birth as a timing mechanism. The silence in the room was of a particular quality, not empty full of the sound of a man understanding something that cannot be understood without a cost. Yes, Min-sik said quietly. That appears to be the case. Tae-jun did not move for a long moment. Then he stood. To me, everything, he said. Everything Song-ho passed. Everything Do-hwan received. Every conversation. Every financial record. Every territorial negotiation conducted while that device was active. I want the full scope before I walk back into any room with any alliance member. That will take time, then start now. He drove back to the hospital. He did not call ahead. He did not send Min-sik first to prepare the ground. He simply got in the car and told his driver where to go, and he sat in the back seat, watching the city move past the windows, and thinking about the fact that someone had looked at the calendar and found the date when his wife was scheduled to give birth, and said, there, that's when we move. That's when he'll be the most divided. That's when he'll make the worst version of his own choice, and we can use it. And then Tae-jun had walked into that meeting room and had made exactly the worst version of his own choice on schedule, like a man following a script written by his enemy. That was the part he could not metabolize. The conspiracy he could dismantle. The traitor he could handle. The media narrative he could redirect. These were problems, and problems had solutions, and Tae-jun Kang had spent his adult life being the kind of man who found solutions. The phone call. Nobody had forced him to silence Nia's call. Nobody had put his thumb on that button. The conspiracy had created the circumstances. His own judgment had made the choice. He found Nia awake, Maya in the bassinet. Her mother Grace sitting in the corner chair with a cup of coffee and the look of a woman who has assessed the incoming situation and decided to let it happen without interference. Grace nodded at him once when he came in. He nodded back. There was a mutual understanding between them that operated entirely without warmth. He sat on the edge of the bed. Nia looked at him. She could read his face now in a way she hadn't been able to that morning. Whatever had happened in the hours since he'd left had stripped something off the surface of him. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Tell me, she said, he told her. Not everything. There were things he would not tell her because they would put her in proximity to danger. She had no reason to be near. But he told her the shape of it, the conspiracy, the device in his study. Seong-ho, the gala being engineered, the timing. He watched her face as she processed it. So the photograph was part of it, she said. Yes. And the meeting that kept you also part of it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked the question that he had been bracing for since the drive over, the question he had spent 40 minutes in the car figuring out how to answer. Does that change what happened? She asked. The conspiracy, Seong-ho, all of it, does it change the fact that you saw my name on your phone and you silenced it? He looked at her. He was a man who had built an empire on the ability to find the angle, to reframe, to present information in the arrangement most favorable to the outcome he wanted. He had done it in boardrooms and back rooms and across tables from men who were actively trying to kill him, and he had rarely failed. He looked at his wife, pale and exhausted in a hospital bed, with their 3-day-old daughter sleeping 2 feet away, and he could not find the angle. "No," he said, "it doesn't change that." Grace in the corner set down her coffee cup very quietly. Naya looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said. It was the same word she had used that morning, the same single syllable, but it meant something different now. That morning it had meant "I'm waiting to see." Now it meant something that sat in the room after she said it, like a change in air pressure. Taejan heard the difference. He sat with her for another hour. He held Maya when Nia needed her hands free. He did not try to explain further or negotiate or reach for the version of this conversation that ended with things restored to their prior position. He just sat there, in the specific discomfort of a man who has run out of moves, and he held his daughter, and he let the hour be what it was. When he finally stood to leave, he paused at the door. "I know what I need to fix," he said, "in the organization. With the media. I know how to fix all of it." Nia looked at him. "I know," she said. "You always know how to fix the organization." The door closed between them. In the hallway, Taejan stood for a moment with his back against the wall and his eyes on the middle distance, and for the first time in longer than he could account for, Kang Tae-jun feared. Powerful. The man who outmaneuvered enemies while everyone else was still identifying that a threat existed did not know what to do next. Not with the conspiracy, not with Seong-ho, not with Do-won. With the woman on the other side of that door who had just used the word "always" in a way that meant something he hadn't prepared for. Pushed off the wall, he walked toward the elevator. Behind him, in room 412, Naya looked at her daughter's sleeping face and understood, with the slow, unwelcome certainty of a person who has been honest with themselves for just long enough, that the conspiracy had changed the facts but not the truth, and that the truth was something she was going to have to decide what to do with. Not today, but soon. The door to whatever came next had just swung open, and neither of them had chosen to walk through it, yet. But the threshold was visible now, and you could not unsee a threshold once you had seen it. That was the night Nia stopped waiting for Tae-jun to become the man she had believed he was. She had not yet decided what she was going to do about the man he actually was. But the waiting was over. Choi Song-ho did not look like a traitor. That was the thing Tae-jun kept returning to in the 72 hours after Min-seok confirmed the breach, the simple, almost insulting fact that Song-ho looked exactly the way he had always looked. Medium height, compact build, the kind of face that photographed well at alliance dinners and disappeared completely in a crowd. He had a wife in Flushing and 2 daughters in middle school and a habit of bringing homemade kimchi jjigae to the office on Fridays, because he always said the food at the building's kitchen was an embarrassment to Korean cuisine. 7 years. 7 years of Fridays. 7 years of kimchi jjigae and loyalty, performed so convincingly that Tae-jun had stopped checking it the way you stop checking the structural integrity of a wall you've leaned against 1,000 times. He was being held in a secure room in the basement level of the 47th Street building. Not a cell. Tae-jun did not maintain cells. It was a conference room, stripped of everything except a table, 2 chairs, and a single overhead light that hummed at a frequency just high enough to be irritating without being identifiable as deliberate. Min-seok's people had searched him thoroughly. His phone was gone. His watch was gone. He had been sitting in that room for 11 hours by the time Tae-jun walked in. Sung-ho looked up when the door opened. He did not look surprised. That was the second thing, the absence of surprise. A man falsely accused panics when the accusation arrives. A man correctly accused has already had the conversation in his head and is waiting for the real one to begin. Tae-jun sat down across from him. He placed nothing on the table. No files, no tablet, no photographs of evidence. He had learned a long time ago that documentation was for courtrooms. In rooms like this one, presence was the only instrument that mattered. "How long were you planning to run it?" Tae-jun asked. Song-ho looked at his hands on the table, then at Tae-jun's face. "I wasn't planning to run it indefinitely." Then what was the end point? Pause. When Do-hwan had enough to move, when the alliance restructured around the new power distribution. "I would have received a position in the new structure." A position. Tae-jun said the word the way you say a word when you need a moment to absorb what it represents. "You burned 7 years for a position." "I burned 7 years," Song-ho said, and his voice had something in it now, something that was not quite defiance, but was adjacent to it. "Because I have been standing at your shoulder for 7 years, and you have never once looked at me the way you look at Min-seok. I have done the same work. I have taken the same risks. He stopped. He pressed his lips together. Reorganized. Do-won offered me a seat at a table instead of a position beside someone else's. The room was very quiet. Tae-jun looked at him for a long time. "My daughter's birth," he said. the hospital schedule. You gave them that. Song-ho did not answer immediately. You gave them the date, Tae-jun continued, his voice dropping, flattening, becoming the particular register that people who had heard it before associated with outcomes they preferred not to think about. You gave them Naya's medical timeline. You helped them engineer the moment. I passed information, Song-ho said. What Do-hwan did with the information? Don't, Tae-jun leaned forward by a fraction. Just a fraction. It was enough. Don't construct the distinction. You knew what he was building. You knew it was being built around that specific date. You knew what would happen if I was in that room when she called. Song-ho's jaw tightened. He looked at the table. Yeah, he said finally. I knew. Tae-jun sat back. He was silent for long enough that the hum of the overhead light became audible again. He was not performing calm. He was actually calm, which was more frightening, because it meant the anger had moved somewhere below the surface where it would do its work without any visible expenditure of energy. Here's what's going to happen, Tae-jun said. You're going to give Min-suk a complete accounting. Every conversation, every piece of information you passed, every name Do-hwan gave you in the new structure and what they were promised. You're going to do this completely and without omission, because the one thing I will not tolerate in this process is discovering afterward that you held something back. And if I do that, your family doesn't know you're here. They will continue not knowing. He stood. Your daughters are in 7th and 8th grade. That doesn't change. Song-ho looked up at him. Something crossed his face that was too complicated to name. That's it, he said. That's it, Tae-jun said. I'm not Do-hwan. I don't need you to suffer. I need you to be useful, and then I need you to be gone. He left the room. In the hallway, he stood for a moment with his hands at his sides, and he breathed through his nose. And he did the thing he had learned to do at 22 when he first started making decisions that actually paid the price. For he separated the emotion from the problem and put the emotion in a place where it would wait for him. Then he called Min-suk and told him to begin the full debrief. The media situation required a different kind of work. The anonymous account that had posted the photograph was gone, but the image itself had achieved escape velocity. It had been screenshotted and reshared enough times that deleting the source was like trying to unring a bell by removing the clapper. The narrative had settled into the particular grooves that media narratives settle into when they have enough emotional components: race, power, infidelity, a newborn baby. It was self-perpetuating. People who had never heard of Kang Tae-jun had opinions about Kang Tae-jun. People who had never heard of Naya Caldwell Kang had opinions about what she should do. Tae-jun's communications team had been managing the volume, but management was not the same as resolution, and Tae-jun did not believe in managing problems that could be solved. He sat with his team in the 47th Street conference room on the morning of the 4th day after Maya's birth and listened to 3 different proposed response strategies with the particular patience of a man who has already decided what he's going to do and is waiting to see if anyone else has independently arrived at the same place. None of them had. Here's what we're going to do, he said, when the 3rd strategy had been presented. We're going to release the evidence, all of it. The device, Song-ho's debrief summary, in broad strokes, the documented timeline of Do-hwan's operation. We're going to demonstrate publicly that the photograph was a piece of an orchestrated campaign against this organization, that its release was deliberate and timed, and that the target was not my reputation, but my judgment during a family crisis. The room was quiet. That exposes Song-ho, someone said. Song-ho made his choices. It also exposes the alliance's internal vulnerabilities. Do-hwan's network will be collapsed before this goes public, Tae-jun said. That's a sequencing issue, not an obstacle. The personal element, his communications director, a woman named Clara Yoon who had been navigating crises for him for 4 years, said carefully, if we release a narrative about the operation targeting your family, specifically the hospital timing we're using Mrs. Kang's surgery and the birth of your daughter as components of a public statement. Have you spoken with her about this? Tae-jun looked at Clara. Clara, who knew him well enough to hold his gaze when most people looked away from it, held his gaze. I'll speak with her, he said. Before or after we finalize the release strategy? A beat. I'll speak with her. Clara wrote something on her notepad. Tae-jun could not see what it was. He suspected it was not flattering. He went to Naya that afternoon. She was home by then, had been discharged 2 days earlier, and was staying at the house because her own apartment was a 4th-floor walk-up with no elevator, and a newborn and a fresh C-section incision made that temporarily non-negotiable. She was in the sitting room off the main hallway with Maya in a bassinet beside her, and her laptop open on the coffee table, and a half-eaten sandwich on the plate next to it. She looked like a woman who had made a decision at some point in the last 48 hours to stop waiting for her life to organize itself around her recovery and to simply resume her life from inside the recovery. He sat in the chair across from her. He told her what he intended to do. He watched her face as he explained the strategy. She listened the way she always listened, completely, without interrupting, with the kind of attention that made keep talking, because it felt like being actually heard rather than simply waited out. It was one of the things about her that had caught him off guard early in their relationship, the quality of her attention, how rare it was to find a person who listened that way. He finished. She looked at him. "You're going to use the birth," she said. "As evidence, as part of the public argument. The birth, the surgery timing, yes. The documented evidence that Duhwan's team deliberately scheduled around." Taejun, her voice was quiet, not loud, but it cut through everything else in the room. "You're going to take the worst night of my life and make it a press strategy. And you came here to tell me about it, but you've already decided to do it." He opened his mouth. "Don't tell me you haven't already decided," she said. "I know how you prepare. You don't come into a room to have a conversation about something you haven't already made up your mind about. You come in to deliver a decision in the form of a conversation." The accuracy of it sat between them. He did not deny it. "I wanted you to know before it became public," he said. "That's not the same as asking me," she said. "Nia, it is not the same thing." She closed her laptop. She looked at him with an expression that was not anger he wished. In some ways, that it were anger, because anger was something he had experience navigating. This was something more exhausted than anger, more settled. "You came here to tell me what you've decided to do with my story. My body, my daughter's first day. You've packaged it up into a narrative that serves your organization, and you came here to let me know." She paused. "That's who you are. That's how your mind works. I know that. I've always known that. I'm trying to protect you," he said. "The counter-narrative clears your name. My name doesn't need clearing by you." The words came out quiet and even and absolutely firm. "I know the truth about what happened. The people who matter to me know the truth. What you're clearing is your own reputation, and you're using my experience to do it." He sat with that. He was quiet for long enough that Maya made a small sound in the bassinet, and both of them looked at her, and the small domestic interruption of a newborn adjusting her position in her sleep did something to the room's air pressure that neither of them could have articulated. "What would you have me do instead?" he asked. "I would have you ask me," she said. "That's the entire point. I would have you walk in here without the decision already made and ask me what I want. I would have you treat me like someone whose answer might actually change the outcome." She looked at him. "Have you ever done that? In 3 years. Have you ever walked into a room with me and genuinely not known what you were going to do when you walked out?" The question hung there. Taejun thought about it honestly. He was a man who prided himself on honesty in assessments, even when the assessment was of himself. Especially then. "No," he said. She nodded, like she had expected it, but it still cost her something to hear. "I want you to go ahead with whatever you're going to do," she said, "because it doesn't matter anymore whether you ask me or not. I've already understood the answer." She picked up her sandwich and looked at it without eating it. "But I needed you to know that I see it. I see the whole pattern. It's not malicious. You genuinely believe you're protecting me. That almost makes it worse." He left. He sat in his car outside his own house for 6 minutes, which was not something he had ever done before. And he looked at the steering wheel, and he thought about the word pattern. The way she had said it, not as an accusation, as a diagnosis. Then he called Clara and told her to proceed. The counter-narrative released 72 hours later. Dr. Duhwan's financial network had been frozen at 3 points simultaneously, a maneuver that required coordination across 2 alliance members who had remained loyal and who had their own reasons for wanting Duhwan contained. The evidence release was precise, controlled, and devastating. It documented the device, the breach, the manufactured gala photograph, and the deliberate timing of the crisis around a known medical event. It did not name Seong-ho publicly. That had been Taejun's one concession to the conversation in the sitting room, because Nia had not asked for it, but he had thought about what she'd said and arrived at it independently. It did name Duhwan, with enough documented specificity that 4 of the alliance's 7 members immediately moved to freeze his operational access pending an internal review. The media narrative reversed within 18 hours. The same outlets that had run the photograph ran the correction. The trending terms changed. The public conversation shifted from abandoned wife to organized criminal conspiracy, and Kang Tae-jun moved from villain to embattled power broker fighting for his organization's integrity, which was not flattering exactly, but was significantly better than the prior framing. His reputation survived, his alliance strengthened. His empire, which had looked briefly like it might fracture under the combined weight of public scandal and internal betrayal, consolidated instead. Tae-jun watched the metrics with Clara in the 47th Street office, and he felt the particular satisfaction of a problem solved efficiently. And then he went home, and he walked through the house to the sitting room, and the sitting room was empty. Naya was upstairs with Maya. He stood in the empty sitting room for a moment. The sandwich plate had been cleared. The bassinet that had been beside the couch was gone. She had moved it upstairs. The laptop was gone. The room looked exactly the way it always looked, which should have been reassuring, and was instead specific shape of an absence. Poured himself a drink he did not particularly want, and sat in his chair and looked at the room, and the thing that occurred to him slowly, like a tide coming in rather than a wave breaking, was that he had spent the last 2 weeks successfully managing every external problem. Song-ho was neutralized. Do-won was contained. The media was corrected. The alliance was stabilized. He had fixed everything he knew how to fix. And across New York, in a hospital room, and then in this house, something he did not know how to fix had been quietly becoming unfixable. He finished the drink. He went upstairs. He stood in the hallway outside the room where Nia had settled, and he raised his hand to knock, and then he lowered it. And he stood there for a moment understanding that there was a version of himself that would have knocked, would have delivered another careful, structured conversation, would have presented himself and his changes and his realizations as a case to be evaluated. He knocked anyway. "Come in," she said. He opened the door. She was in the chair by the window with Maya against her shoulder, doing the slow rhythmic back patting of a woman who has learned in 2 weeks what it takes to move gas through a 6-pound body. She looked at him without surprise. She had known he would come. "The narrative worked," he said. "It's done, I know. I read it." He leaned against the doorframe. He looked at his daughter's face over Naya's shoulder, that dark, crumpled, ancient face that was already, in 2 weeks, starting to become something more specific, something that was gathering itself into a particular human being. "I did it the way you said," he told her. "I did it without asking." "I know. I'm telling you because I think you should know that I heard you, even when I did the thing anyway." She looked at him steadily. Maya made a small noise against her shoulder. Nia resumed the patting. "Tae-jun," she said, "hearing me isn't the same as changing." He absorbed this. "I know," he said. "Do you want to hold her?" Nia asked. He crossed the room and took Maya from her, and he stood by the window with his daughter against his chest. And outside the window, New York was doing what it always did, enormous, indifferent, lit up against the November dark. Nia stood. She stretched her back slowly, carefully, the careful movement of a body still negotiating with a recent wound. She went to the door. "I'm going to sleep in the other room tonight," she said. It was the first time she had said it. She had been in the house for 2 weeks, and they had maintained a kind of careful domestic proximity, same floor, separate rhythms, but she had not said it explicitly until now. He turned from the window. He looked at her. She was standing in the doorway, one hand on the frame, and she looked tired in a way that was not about sleep. And she looked certain in a way that was not about tonight specifically, but about a decision that had been building in her since October 14th and had now arrived at the point where it needed to be said out loud to become real. "Okay," he said. She looked at him, at Maya in his arms, at his face above their daughter's head, and something moved through her expression that was too layered to call any one thing. Then she said, "I've been thinking about what I need to tell you, and I think you already know what it is." She did not wait for him to answer. She went down the hall. The door of the other room closed softly. Tae-jun stood at the window with Maya sleeping against his chest, and the city outside continued its indifferent, illuminated roar, and he understood not as a possibility, not as a fear, but as a fact that had just completed its process of becoming, that the woman down the hall had not gone to the other room because she needed rest. She had gone to the other room because she had made her decision. And tomorrow, she was going to tell him what it was. She told him at 7 in the morning, not in the bedroom, not in the kitchen over coffee, not in some domestic setting that would have softened the edges of it. She found him in his study, standing at the window with a cup of tea that had gone cold while he read something on his phone. And she stood in the doorway in her robe with her hair loose and her face carrying the particular clarity of a woman who has spent the night not sleeping but deciding, and she said it without preamble because she had learned, over 3 years, that preamble with Tae-jun was just a longer route to the same place. "I'm moving out," she said. He turned from the window. He looked at her the way he looked at things that required his full processing capacity, completely still, eyes steady, the rest of his body so controlled it barely registered as a living thing. The teacup was in his right hand. He did not put it down. When, he said, not a negotiation, not a protest. Just when the single most honest question a man can ask, when the woman he loves has just told him she is leaving, because it means he has heard her, actually heard her. Not heard the words and started building a counter-argument, but heard the decision underneath the words and recognized it as a decision. Naya registered this, the absence of the argument she had steeled herself for. Something shifted in her chest, not second-guessing, not reversal, but the particular grief of watching someone do the right thing 4 weeks too late. I need a few days to arrange things, she said. I want to do this without it being a scene. It won't be a scene. I need you to mean that. I mean it. She looked at him for a long moment. He had not moved. He was still at the window, still holding the cold tea, still doing the thing he did where he absorbed difficult information without visibly processing it, though she knew by now that the processing was happening somewhere below the surface, at a speed and intensity she would never fully have access to. I'm not doing this to punish you, she said. I need you to know that. I know that. And this isn't about the affair that didn't happen. It's not about Du Huan or Song Ho or the photograph. I want you to understand what it actually is. Tell me, he said. His voice was quiet. Not small. Taejun's voice was never small, but contained in a different way than usual. Like a man deliberately holding himself at a lower volume because he understands the room requires it. It's the pattern, she said. It's the way you move through a room and make every decision that involves me without ever stopping to wonder whether I want a say. The way you love me by managing me. You protect me by deciding for me. You take care of me by taking over. She stopped, organized, started again. I spent 3 years being grateful that the man I loved was powerful and capable and always had a plan. And somewhere in there, I stopped noticing that the plan always came first, and I was always already in it by the time I found out about it. He set the teacup down. He set it down on the windowsill, and he crossed the room and he sat in the chair across from his own desk, the visitor's chair. Not his chair. A choice that she registered and filed without commenting on, and he looked at the floor for a moment before he looked back at her. I know, he said. I know that's true. I can't teach Maya that this is what love looks like, Nia said. A man who loves you but decides for you. A man who's never once in 3 years walked into a room and said, I don't know what to do. Can you help me figure it out? Her voice stayed even. She had practiced this, not in the rehearsed way, but in the way of a person who has turned something over so many times it is worn smooth. She's going to be watching us every day of her life. She's going to learn from us what it means to be in a relationship. And I will not let her learn that love means making yourself smaller so the other person's decisions have room to land. The room was quiet. Outside, November was doing November things, gray sky pressing down on the city, the first real cold of the season, making the windows contract slightly in their frames, a sound like the building settling into itself. Where will you go? He asked. My mother's neighborhood. I found a place. She paused. It has an elevator. The elevator, the detail was so specific and so practical that it almost broke something in the room's atmosphere, almost made the conversation human in a way that the larger statements hadn't. She had found an apartment near her mother. She had checked that it had an elevator because she was still recovering from surgery and had a newborn. She had done this planning quietly in the spaces around his crisis management and her own recovery, with the competence of a woman who had been taking care of herself long before Kang Taejun entered her life. I want her to have both of us, Nia said, fully. I'm not going to. I won't use her. She won't be a weapon. You're her father, and she needs you in her life, and I need you to know I mean that. I know you mean it. I need your word. You have it, he said. Whatever schedule you want. Whatever arrangement makes sense for her. I'll show up when I say I will. He looked at her directly. Every time. The weight of that every time sat in the room between them. They both heard it. Neither of them reached for it. Okay, she said. She stood in the doorway for another moment. She looked at the room, his desk, his books, the photograph on the shelf of the two of them. At a function 3 years ago, where she was laughing at something he'd said and his face was doing that thing it rarely did in public. That thing where the control slipped just enough to show the person underneath. Then she went to get Maya. The days that followed were the strangest of Taejun's adult life, and his adult life had contained a remarkable range of strange days. Naya moved with efficiency and without drama. She arranged her things her own things, the things that had been hers before the marriage, and the things she'd brought into it with a methodical calm that was somehow harder to watch than any confrontation would have been. She did not ask him to help. She did not ask him to stay away. He was simply there, in his house, while she prepared to leave it, and the particular domesticity of her departure, the way she folded Maya's small clothes, the way she organized the nursing equipment, the way she left the kitchen exactly as she'd found it, made it feel less like a leaving and more like a proof. She had always been capable of this, of managing herself and her life and her decisions with or without him. He had provided resources and security and a certain kind of love, and none of those things had made her dependent on him, because Nia Caldwell had been taking care of herself since long before she knew his name. On the morning she left, 3 days after the conversation in the study, he was waiting in the front hallway. He had not planned to be there. He had told himself he would be in his study. He had told himself he would give her the space of an unobserved exit, because watching would only be for his own benefit, only a way of making her departure into an experience he was present for, rather than something she did on her own terms. He was in the hallway anyway. She came down the stairs with Maya in the infant carrier against her chest and a bag on each shoulder, and she stopped when she saw him, and for a moment neither of them moved. "Let me take the bags," he said. She unslung them and let him take them. He carried them to the door. He stood aside while she arranged Maya in the carrier, adjusting the straps with the precise practiced movements of someone who has done this enough times to do it without thought. Maya's face was visible over the top edge of the carrier, her dark eyes open and unfocused in the way of very young infants, her expression conveying the profound indifference of someone who has not yet developed opinions about real estate transitions. Naya looked at Taejun. He looked back. She said, "Come on Sunday." "The Adrensuk already has it." A pause. "Of course he does." Something crossed her face that was not quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood. She held out Maya to him. He took his daughter and held her for a moment against his chest, pressing his lips to her hair, and he stood there in the hallway of the house where she had been born, where she had come home from the hospital, and slept in the small bassinet beside her mother, and learned, in the specific wordless way of newborns, the smell and sound and particular warmth of the people she had been given, and he allowed himself to feel the full weight of what this moment cost, without managing it, without moving it somewhere more convenient. He handed Maya back. "I'll be there Sunday," he said. "I know," she said. She walked to the door. She did not look back. He stood in the hallway for a long time after the door closed, and then he went into his study, and he sat in his own chair for the first time in weeks, and he looked at the empty desk and thought about the specific things she had said, that he kept returning to, not the accusations, not the catalog of failures, but the question she had asked him in the hospital. "Have you ever walked into a room with me and genuinely not known what you were going to do when you walked out?" No, he had not. The answer had been no for 3 years, and he had never noticed, because not knowing had always felt to him like failure, like the absence of competence. He had confused certainty with care and called it love. This was the thought that occupied Kang Tae-jun on the morning his wife left, while across the city, Nia carried their daughter into a smaller, quieter life that was genuinely, entirely hers. He had 4 weeks before Doo-hwan moved again. He knew this because the intelligence from Seong-ho's debrief had been specific about timelines. Doo-hwan's network had been damaged by the financial freeze and the alliance internal review. But damage was not elimination, and a man like Doo-hwan did not build an 18-month operation only to abandon it because the first move had been exposed. He would regroup, he would adjust. He would come back through a different angle, and the angle would be something Taejun had not yet anticipated, because the angles Taejun had not yet anticipated were, by definition, outside his field of vision. The call from Min-sik came on a Wednesday evening 3 weeks after Naya left. Taejun was in the kitchen actually cooking, which was not something he did often, but the house had taken on an acoustic quality in Nia's absence that made silence feel different from before. An activity helped when his phone buzzed on the counter. He saw Min-suk's name. He answered immediately. Doo-hwan called an emergency meeting, Min-suk said. No greeting, no preamble. Min-sik had been with him long enough to have calibrated exactly how much of Taejun's time any given sentence was worth. Tonight, Meridian private room, 9 o'clock. He's invited all 7 alliance members. Taejun turned off the stove. Who confirmed? 5 so far. Chung and Vasquez are still dark. What's the stated agenda? Alliance restructuring proposal. He's calling it a stability framework. Taejun was already moving toward his study. He's going to make a formal move tonight, in front of witnesses. He thinks the restructuring gives him legitimacy if he can get a majority vote on a new framework. It doesn't matter that his operation was exposed. He gets what he wanted through process instead of pressure. That's my read, too. I need everything we have on the remaining 3 members. Who Do-won has leverage over, and how much? I need it in the next 2 hours. Already working on it. Taejun got dressed in the dark the way he had learned to dress, when dressing needed to be fast jacket, cufflinks, the particular shoes that had a grip to them that the formal ones did not, a choice nobody in the room would notice or understand. He stood in front of the mirror. He looked at himself. He thought about Nia saying, "You don't come into a room to have a conversation about something you haven't already made up your mind about." He thought about walking into that meeting tonight. He thought about the variables he could not yet account for the 3 members he hadn't confirmed. The angle of Do-hwan's approach, the specific architecture of the argument Do-hwan would make in a room full of men who were measuring their own survival against their loyalty to Taejun's leadership. He did not know, for the first time he could remember, exactly what he was going to do when he walked out of that room. The thought was not comfortable. He went anyway. The Park Meridian's private level was a place that had been specifically designed to look like nothing important happened there. Pale walls, neutral carpet, the kind of tasteful anonymity that costs more than visible luxury. Taejun had been in that room dozens of times. He had run meetings there, ended partnerships there, drawn territorial lines on napkins that governed millions of dollars and hundreds of lives. He arrived 8 minutes early. Do-hwan was already there. The 2 men looked at each other across the room for a moment, before anyone else had arrived, and in that moment the entire architecture of the last 18 months was visible, the device behind the wall panel, the manufactured gala. Songho's 7 years of performed loyalty, Naya's name glowing on a silenced phone screen, Maya arriving into a room without her father in it. Do-hwan was 61 years old, heavier than his photographs, with the particular physical presence of a man who had spent decades in rooms where physical presence was a form of argument. His face was unreadable in the way of men who have made unreadability a professional discipline. He wore a gray suit and he was holding a glass of water, and he looked at Taejun. The way you look at a problem you thought you had solved and have just discovered is still operational. "Kang," he said, "Do-hwan." They did not shake hands. The other members arrived over the next 12 minutes. Taejun noted each entry who came in pairs, who came alone, who looked at Do-hwan first when they entered, and who looked at Taejun. The specific topography of alliance loyalty made visible through the unconscious direction of a man's eyes when he walks into a contested room. By the time everyone was seated, Taejun had a reasonable map of where the night was going. Do-hwan stood. His opening was polished, measured. The opening of a man who had rehearsed without letting the rehearsal show. He framed the proposal as a response to institutional vulnerability. The breach had exposed a structural problem. The existing framework concentrated too much decision-making authority in a single position. A distributed leadership model would make the alliance more resilient, more adaptive, less susceptible to the kind of targeted operation that had recently compromised its stability. He did not say Taejun's name during this section. He didn't need to. Every person in the room understood that concentrated decision-making authority and targeted operation that compromised stability were biographical references dressed in organizational language. Taejun let him finish, then he spoke. He did not stand. Remaining seated was itself a choice, a statement about how much threat he was willing to perform versus how much he was willing to simply be. What Baek Do-won is proposing, Taejun said, is a response to a crisis that he manufactured. The breach he's citing as evidence of structural vulnerability was an operation he funded, staffed, and directed over 18 months. The device in my study that he's referencing as proof that I was compromised, his people placed it. He looked around the table. Not at Do-hwan. At the others, I have the documentation. I have Choi Song-ho's complete debrief, verified and cross-referenced. I have the financial trails connecting Do-hwan's operational accounts to 3 separate payments made to individuals who no longer work in this building. He paused. What he's asking you to vote for tonight is to reward the operation that failed by giving him through process what he couldn't take through pressure. Silence. Do-hwan's face had not changed. He had prepared for this. He said, "The documentation you're referencing has not been independently verified by any alliance member. You are asking this table to take your word over a formal proposal. I'm asking this table to take documented evidence over a man whose operation against this alliance was exposed 6 weeks ago. Your interpretation of that evidence, my interpretation." Taejun looked at him directly now. "You put a listening device in the room where I plan. You accessed my wife's medical records to time your operation around the birth of my daughter. Used a man's child as a clock." He kept his voice level. Not loud. Level was more effective than loud in a room like this and with men like these. "You want to call that a structural proposal? Fine. Let's vote." The vote was not close. 5-2 in Taejun's favor, with one abstention from a member who was clearly waiting to see which way the remaining current ran before committing. Doohwan's 2 votes were the members Taejun had identified as leveraged men with complications in their own operations that Doohwan had presumably offered to manage in exchange for support. Doohwan stood when the result was announced. He looked at Taejun. "This isn't finished," he said. It was not a threat, exactly. It was the statement of a man who is not accustomed to losing and has not yet made peace with the fact that he has just lost. "Yes, it is," Taejun said. Doohwan left. The room restructured itself around his absence the way rooms do when a dominant presence departs, a collective exhale, a shift in posture, conversations beginning in low voices at the edges. Taejun sat where he was and allowed the room to work through it. He spoke with each remaining member individually over the following 90 minutes, not to celebrate, not to extract commitment, but to assess, accurately, where each of them actually stood now that the immediate pressure had resolved. He did not enjoy this part of his work. He was good at it. Those were not the same thing. He was leaving the Meridian at 11:40 when his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Nia. He stopped in the lobby. Around him, the hotel moved through its late evening, a couple arguing quietly near the bar, a concierge handling someone's luggage with the professional invisibility of a person who has learned to be present and absent simultaneously, a woman laughing at something her phone had told her. He answered. "Hey," she said. Her voice was low. Maya was probably sleeping nearby. "I heard the meeting went well. How did you—" "Dominique knows someone who knows someone." "Don't ask." A pause. "Are you okay?" He stood in the lobby of the Park Meridian and absorbed the question. "Are you okay?" 3 years. How many times had she asked him that? How many times had he said fine, or will be fine, or I'm handling it, reflexively, the way you give an answers when you haven't actually processed the question? "I don't know," he said. "Not yet." A beat of silence. "That's different," she said.
Yeah.
She was quiet for a moment. He could hear faintly the sound of Maya's particular small hours breathing through whatever device Nia had near the bassinet. The sound of his daughter sleeping 3 miles away in an apartment he had not yet been inside. "You should sleep," Nia said. "You should too. Maya has opinions about that." He almost smiled. "Sunday," he said. "Sunday," she said. She ended the call. He stood in the lobby for another moment. Then he went outside into the cold, into the city's November roar, and he stood on the sidewalk and he thought about the fact that she had called. Not to update him on Maya, not to arrange logistics, not for any of the practical reasons that their co-parenting arrangement provided as cover for contact. She had called to ask if he was okay. He did not know what to do with that. He got in the car and told his driver to take him home. And the city moved past the windows the way it always moved, enormous, indifferent, full of lives being lived at full volume in all directions. And Taejun thought about Do-won's face when the vote was announced. And he thought about Seong-ho in that basement room saying, "I have been standing at your shoulder for 7 years." And he thought about Nia in the doorway of his study, saying, "You don't come into a room without already knowing what you're going to do." He thought about the moment in the Meridian when he had looked at the table full of men who were measuring their survival, and he had not known for the first time exactly what he was going to do. He had done it anyway. He had walked in without the answer already prepared, and he had found the answer in the room, in the moment, in the actual living interaction between himself and other actual people, and it had worked not because he was infallible, but because he was present, actually present, not managing from a position of predetermined certainty, but responding to what was actually in front of him. It was what Nia had been asking him to do for 3 years. In their marriage, in their home, with her. He pressed the heel of his hand against his sternum, where something had been sitting since October 14th, with the specific weight of a thing not yet fully understood. It did not lift, but it shifted. Outside the car, the city kept moving. Somewhere in it, his daughter was breathing in her sleep, and his wife was lying awake in the small apartment she had chosen for herself. And the distance between all of them was exactly what Taejun had created and exactly what he was going to have to learn to live inside. He had won the meeting. He had stabilized the alliance. He had done tonight the thing he was built to do. He went home to the house that was very quiet and very large, and increasingly his alone, and he poured a drink he didn't finish. And he stood in the hallway where Nia had walked out with Maya against her chest, and he looked at the front door. He had promised her he would show up on Sunday. He would show up on Sunday. That was all he had. One promise, and the intention to keep it, and the long, unscheduled, uncontrolled work of becoming someone different than the man he had spent 40 years constructing. He was not sure he knew how. He was beginning to understand that not knowing how was not by itself a reason to stop. Somewhere across the city, Duwan was sitting with his 2 loyal votes and his damaged network and his unfinished sentence, and Tae-jun knew with the specific, flat certainty of a man who has studied his enemies long enough to predict them that Du-hwan was already building the next angle. The next move was coming. He could feel it the way you feel a change in weather before the sky shows it, in the quality of the air, in the particular stillness that precedes something that has been building for a long time, finally deciding to arrive. He set down the unfinished drink. He went upstairs. He stood in the doorway of the room that had been Nia's for the 2 weeks she had stayed, and he looked at the empty chair by the window where she had sat with Maya on her shoulder, and he did not perform anything for the empty room. No composure, no containment, nothing that would have been suitable for an audience. He just stood there, a man who had won every external battle, standing in the room that proved it. Du-hwan made his next move on a Thursday morning, and he made it the way he made everything, quietly, through a channel that nobody had thought to watch, at a moment calibrated to land when the defenses were oriented in the wrong direction. Tae-jun had spent the 3 weeks since the Meridian vote shoring up the alliance's internal architecture, meeting with members individually, reviewing the financial infrastructure that Seong-ho's 18-month breach had touched, rebuilding the specific texture of trust that gets damaged when a man you vouched for turns out to have been listening through the wall. It was methodical work, unglamorous work, the kind of work that did not announce itself and did not produce visible victories. It simply had to be done, one conversation at a time, one reviewed account at a time, until the structure was sound enough to lean on again. He was in the middle of this work when Du-hwan moved. He went through Nia. Not directly. Du-hwan was not a man who moved directly toward anything. He moved the way water moves through rock, not by force, but by finding the existing fracture and expanding it with patience and sustained pressure until the rock does the work itself, splitting along lines that were always there, that simply needed the right encouragement to open. What he did was precise and economical and deliberately designed to be deniable by anyone who needed to deny it. He had someone deliver a package to Naya's apartment building on the Upper West Side, not to her door, not anywhere that would require a signature or a name or a camera capturing a face. To the front desk, addressed to Nia by full name, left with the morning doorman, along with a note explaining that the contents were legal documentation related to her husband's business affairs requiring her review. The package contained 3 things: a set of photographs, a set of financial documents, a single typed page. The photographs were of Maya. They were not photographs of violence or explicit threat. They were in some ways more disturbing than that they were photographs of ordinary mornings. Maya in a stroller in the park 2 blocks east, taken from a measured distance through the bare February trees. Maya outside the pediatrician's office on Amsterdam Avenue, Naya adjusting the stroller canopy before going in, the image so clear and the angle so deliberate that the viewer could see Maya's face without ambiguity. Maya and Naya leaving the apartment building on a Tuesday morning, the doorman holding the door, the street behind them ordinary and full of ordinary people, none of whom knew they were part of a surveillance record. The images were time-stamped. The timestamps covered a period of 18 days. Someone had been there, every one of those days, at various times, in various positions, watching, patient, professional, rotating locations so that no single presence would register as a pattern to someone paying attention. 18 days of watching Nia push her daughter through the ordinary geography of her new life, without Naya knowing, without anyone knowing, and now here it was on paper, the proof of access, a demonstration of capability delivered without a single explicit word of threat because it did not need explicit words. The financial documents were real, pulled from Seong-ho's 18 months of transmitted intelligence, selected and arranged by someone who understood that selective presentation is a form of fabrication that leaves no fingerprints. In isolation, stripped of context and cross-reference, arranged in the specific sequence Du-hwan's people had constructed. They told a story about Tae-jun's organization that could theoretically interest federal investigators with time and inclination. The typed page said, "Tell him to step down from alliance leadership, voluntarily and permanently." Or the photographs explain themselves and the documents find the right desk. Naya called him at 8:14. He knew from the first sound. Not the word, there was no word yet, just her breath when he answered, the specific controlled sharpness of a woman managing fear by breathing through it instead of letting it break the surface. He had heard her afraid before, in the hospital, in the recovery room, and this was different from that. That fear had been inward, about her body and her daughter, and the specific terror of a medical situation she could not control. This fear was outward and cold. The fear of someone who has just discovered that the world they believed they were living in is not the actual world. "I need you to come here," she said. Now he was in the car in 4 minutes. She was in the lobby when he arrived. Maya in the carrier against her chest, wide awake, her dark eyes moving between her mother's face and the unfamiliar activity of the lobby with the alert, comprehensive attention of an infant absorbing everything. Package was open on the front desk. The doorman had stepped to the far end, with the professional discretion of a man who understands certain situations. Tae-jun looked at the photographs first. He went through them with the flat, categorizing attention he brought to intelligence materials, not because he was not feeling anything, but because feeling it immediately was not yet useful and the information needed to come first. He noted the locations and matched them to a timeline. He noted the angles of approach and identified the rotation pattern, which told him multiple observers, not one. He noted the image quality and the specific technical characteristics that told him this was not amateur work. He looked at the typed page. He looked at Nia. She was watching his face the way she had watched him in the study when she told him she was leaving completely, without looking away, reading everything his face was doing and filtering it through her own understanding of who he was. Her right hand was pressed flat against Maya's back inside the carrier, the instinctive gesture of a mother putting herself between her child and the thing she cannot yet locate clearly. "Someone has been watching her," Nia said. Her voice was low and stripped of everything except the fact. "For 18 days, based on those timestamps, I walked past them in the park, outside Dr. Yuen's office. I walked past people who were there specifically to photograph my daughter, and I didn't know, and she didn't know, and she stopped. Breathed, reorganized. Tell me what this is, completely. Not the version you decide I can handle." He told her everything. Du-hwan's name, the Meridian vote, and its outcome. The specific mechanics of why a man who loses a formal play reaches for informal leverage, and what that leverage tells you about his actual position. The financial documents, their origin, the gap between their appearance and their substance. The specific reason Du-hwan had offered the warning, rather than simply filing. The warning itself was evidence that he was not certain the materials would hold under examination, that he needed Tae-jun to flinch from the threat rather than wait to see if the threat was real. He told her all of it, standing in the lobby of her building, with her daughter between them and the morning moving past outside the glass doors. She listened the way she always listened, fully, without interruption, not waiting for him to finish, so she could respond but actually receiving what he was saying and letting it settle before she did anything with it. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment that was long enough to be meaningful. "Are they going to do anything to her?" she said, physically. "Tell me if the answer is yes." "No," he said. "The photographs are about access, not threat. They're showing me they can see her. They're not showing me they intend to harm her." Du-hwan is not that kind of operator. Direct violence creates a different problem for him than leverage does. "You're certain?" He held her gaze. "I'm certain." She absorbed this. Something in her face shifted, not relaxing, but reorganizing around a slightly different set of parameters. The fear did not leave. It settled into something more workable. "I want Maya out of the city," she said. "I'll arrange." "I am arranging it," she said. "I'm not asking you to handle this part. I'm telling you what I'm doing, and I need to know if it creates any complication for your situation, because if it does, I need that information before I make the call." He looked at her. He thought about the man he had been in October, in November, in December, the man who would have heard this and would have seen the opening. The way removing Naya from the city could be framed as protection, could be managed into an arrangement that brought her back into his infrastructure, his security, his jurisdiction. The way a man who loves through management would have moved, in this moment, toward the outcome he wanted. He thought about it. He let it pass. "It doesn't create a complication," he said. "The right call. Go to your mother's. Take as long as you need." She looked at him for a moment longer than the answer required. "The photographs," she said. "I want them destroyed. Not filed as evidence, not kept for the counter-narrative, not used in any capacity. I don't want images of my daughter existing as documents in your organization's operational record." "Done. I need your word specifically. You have it." She looked at him once more. Then she turned to the elevator without looking at the photographs on the desk, without looking back at him, and the doors opened, and she stepped inside, and she was gone. He stood in the lobby. He picked up the photographs. He went through them one final time, not for sentiment, but for the operational information they contained: the rotation pattern, the positions, the technical signature of the surveillance team, and then he took them to the shredder behind the front desk, which the doorman provided without being asked, and he fed every image through until nothing remained that could be reconstructed. Then he walked out into the morning and called Min-sik. They worked through it for 4 hours. Min-suk had the full Song-ho debrief materials, and they laid Doo-hwan's selected documents against the complete record with methodical, grinding thoroughness, cross-referencing every excerpt against its source context, mapping every gap between what the excerpts claimed and what the full record showed. It was not the kind of work that felt like progress while you were doing it. Felt like inventory, like counting every item in a damaged warehouse to understand what actually broke and what just looks broken. What they found confirmed Tae-jun's initial read from the lobby. Doo-hwan's selection was sophisticated, and it was not wrong. Exactly, the documents were real, the financial patterns were real, but it was overextended. Tried to make the materials support a conclusion that the materials themselves, examined in full context, did not reach. 3 document sequences contained inferential gaps that a competent federal examination would identify within the first serious review cycle. The story was coherent at a distance and hollow up close. He built this for pressure, Min-sik said, not prosecution. He built it to see if I'd flinch before he had to find out if it would hold, Tae-jun said. Min-suk looked at him. Will you? No. He called Doo-hwan from the office window, standing looking down at 47th Street in the afternoon. Doo-hwan answered on the 3rd ring with the silence of a man who had been expecting this call and had prepared his initial register with care. The package was received, Doo-hwan said. I'm calling to tell you it didn't work. Not as a negotiation, as information so you can make an accurate assessment of where you actually stand. Pause. You're not stepping down, no. Then the documentation proceeds. Tae-jun said. My legal team has been through the specific materials you selected from Seong-ho's files, and I'm confident enough in what a proper examination reveals to decline making a permanent decision about 12 years of my life based on 3 document sequences that won't survive the second look. He let that sit. But that's not why I called. The quality of the silence changed. The photographs, Tae-jun said, and his voice dropped into the specific register, not louder, lower, the particular frequency that communicated in this world, what volume communicated in others. My daughter, 4 months old, my wife, who is no longer my wife, who has no position in this organization, and no stake in anything you and I are resolving. Private person living a private life. He paused. Someone connected to your operation spent 18 days photographing my 4-month-old daughter and her mother in public spaces, and packaged those photographs as a threat instrument. You delivered them to a woman who is not a party to any of this. Doo-hwan said nothing. I'm going to say this one time, Tae-jun said. If anyone connected to you, anyone, through any chain of distance or intermediary, comes within operational proximity of my daughter or her mother again, for any reason, in any capacity, the conversation we are having right now ends, and what replaces it will not be a phone call, and it will not have a diplomatic resolution available. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. I want you to understand that this is not performance. I'm not managing your perception of me right now. I'm telling you something that is true. Silence. 15 seconds. 20. You're projecting strength from a compromised position, Doo-hwan said. Test it if you need certainty, Tae-jun said, or make an accurate assessment and act accordingly. He ended the call. He stood at the window and he breathed, and he let the fear that the call had required him to contain exist fully in his body. For 60 seconds, the fear that lived in the timestamps on those photographs, in the image of Maya's dark hair visible above the stroller canopy on an ordinary Tuesday morning, while someone stood at a measured distance making a record of her face. Spent 20 years training himself not to be afraid in the ways that paralyzed. He had never trained himself not to be afraid of this, because he had not known until October that this was something he was capable of being afraid of. He let it be there. Then he called Grace Caldwell. Grace answered on the 2nd ring with the voice she reserved for him, not hostile, not warm. The carefully maintained evenness of a woman who had made a deliberate decision not to hate her son-in-law and was honoring that decision 1 phone call at a time. Nia's already called, she said. I know. I wanted to call you myself. She said, you're handling it. Yes, is that true, or is that what you're telling her? The directness of it, so much like Nia, the same refusal of the comfortable answer landed cleanly. It's true, he said. I have a clear read on the situation, and I know what needs to happen. What I'm less certain about is the timeline. How long? 2 to 3 weeks if the process moves as expected. Possibly longer if something shifts unexpectedly. Grace was quiet for a moment. He could hear the background of her house, a television on somewhere, the distant sound of a kitchen. Tae-jun. She said his name carefully, as though she had decided before the call to say it and had been waiting for the right moment. I'm going to say something to you that I want you to take seriously. Okay, Nia told me when all of this started that the problem wasn't that you were a bad man. She was very specific about that. She said the problem was that you were a particular kind of man who occupied a particular kind of space, and that the space you took didn't leave enough room for her to be the woman she needed to be. A pause. She said she needed you to understand that distinction. That it wasn't about your character, it was about your habits. He absorbed this. I'm working on that, he said. I know you are, Grace said. I can see it, that's why I'm telling you. Another pause longer. Take care of my daughter and that baby. Yes, he said. Duwan did not send the documents. Taejun would never have a complete accounting of what produced that outcome, the phone call. The legal team's preemptive positioning with two specific people in two specific offices, who would have been the recipients if the materials had been filed, the cold arithmetic of a man reassessing a play that had not generated the intended response. The internal mechanics were not available to him, and he spent no significant energy trying to reconstruct them. What mattered was the outcome, and the outcome, over the following 2 weeks, was silence. The Alliance's internal review concluded 22 days after the Thursday morning package. The process moved with the specific exhausting pace of formal procedures conducted under informal pressure, simultaneously insufficient for the complexity of what it was examining and too consequential to accelerate. Taejun attended every session. He brought documentation rather than argument. He answered questions with the specific patience of a man who has decided that winning through the process requires honoring the process even when the process is slow and imperfect and occasionally frustrating. Duhwan sent a representative to the final session. The representative delivered a written response that accepted the censure's formal findings without conceding their accuracy. Precisely the language of a man who is preserving optionality rather than defending a position. The censure passed. Duhwan's operational access was suspended pending a full financial audit going back 30 months. It was not a dramatic outcome. It was a procedural one, and procedural outcomes have the specific durability of things that were correctly processed. Taejun read the censure document once, in his office, alone, and then he set it on the desk and looked at it for a moment, and thought about the specific distance between this outcome and October 14th, the night the device behind the wall panel had been transmitting, and Song-ho had been performing loyalty at his table, and a viral photograph had been set in motion, and a man had pressed his thumb onto a button and made the choice that started all of it. He thought about that distance. Then he put the document in the filing system and went home. He drove to Baltimore 3 weeks later on a Saturday morning. He drove himself in the unremarkable sedan, leaving before 6 to be ahead of the traffic, moving through the city's pre-dawn quiet and then out into the flat landscape of the mid-Atlantic corridor as the sky began to lighten. He had not announced the specific time of his arrival. He had told Nia he was coming, and she had told Grace, and beyond that he had not managed the approach. He drove with no calls, no news, nothing playing. Just the road and the early morning and the quiet of a man who was learning, slowly and with imperfect execution, to inhabit his own experience without immediately converting it into a problem to be solved. Grace opened the door before he reached the porch. She stood in the doorway in the posture of a woman on her own ground, assessing an arrival she had not fully decided about. She looked at him the way she had looked at him since October, not without warmth, but with warmth held at a careful distance. The way you hold a thing you are not yet sure is safe to set down. She's in the back, Grace said and stepped aside. He went through the house, the smell of it familiar now from 3 previous visits, old wood and something baking, and the layered domestic smell of a home that had been a home for decades. Out the back door into the yard where the oak tree stood, and the thin spring light was doing its best against the morning cool. Naya was in a wooden chair with Maya on a blanket in the grass. Maya saw him first. She was on her back, examining the sky with the serious, unhurried attention of someone who has not yet decided whether sky is interesting or simply enormous, and she turned her head when he came through the door and found his face across the yard, and went still for a moment, the specific stillness of recognition, of a 4-month-old locating something known in an environment that is not yet fully mapped. And then both her arms moved at once, the emphatic, whole-body gesture that was as close as 4 months of motor development allowed to saying, "You." He crossed the yard. He crouched down on the blanket and she grabbed his finger with both hands, and he looked at her face, which was different from the face he had left in the hospital in October, less new-looking, more specific, accumulating daily the particular features and expressions that would eventually settle into whoever Maya Kang decided to be, and the thing in his chest that had been locked at high tension since October released by another degree. "Hi," he said. She made a sound, directed and aimed and unmistakably communicative, even without the architecture of language to carry it. "Hi," he said again. Naya was watching from her chair. She had a coffee cup in both hands, and she was wearing a gray sweater he had never seen before, something that existed entirely outside the inventory of the life they had shared, and she looked rested in a way that surprised him not fully. Maya was 4 months old, and full rest was a theoretical concept, but rested enough that the specific tightness that had lived behind her eyes for the last 6 months had lifted by a visible degree. 4 hours straight last night, she said. First time. You should have slept too, I did. 3 of them. She looked at him over the cup. You look like you haven't slept since Thursday. The review concluded Thursday. I know. How did it actually go? So he told her. Not the official version, the version that would appear in Alliance records, the measured language of formal censure and suspended access. He told her the room, the resistance from Du Huan's 2 leveraged members, the way the financial documentation had needed to be walked through 3 separate times before the full picture registered for everyone present. He told her about Du Huan's representative, reading the written response in a flat, professional voice while 7 people in the room understood that the absence of Du Huan himself was its own statement. He told her about sitting in his car in the parking structure below the Meridian after the session ended, in the dark and the quiet, for 11 minutes, not doing anything, just sitting, while the outcome became real in the specific way that outcomes become real when they are finally finished, and you no longer have to manage them. Naya listened. The yard was quiet around them. The oak tree moved in the light wind. Maya was asleep on the blanket between them, her hand still loosely curled around his finger, her face arranged in the absolute peace of someone for whom the world has not yet provided cause for anything except complete trust. Is it finished? She said, when he had been quiet long enough that the question was clearly not interrupting anything. This version of it, this specific operation, yes. Du Huan doesn't end men like him relocate and rebuild. But the 18-month construction that used Seong-ho and the photograph and the surveillance, that specific machine is dismantled. She nodded slowly. And my name in it, she said. The narrative. Clean has been since November. The correction held, and the review's outcome reinforces it. Which you managed, she said. Not accusatory, factual. Returning to the record, because she was a woman who kept accurate records even when they were expensive to maintain. Which I managed, he confirmed, without asking you. Yes, she looked at her coffee, then at the oak tree, then at his face. I've thought about that up here. Whether the outcome changes the wrongness of the process. Whether I can separate them cleanly. She was quiet for a moment. I can't make them the same thing. The process was wrong, and the outcome helped me. Both of those are true, and they don't cancel each other. I know. I don't need you to agree with me, she said. I'm not looking for your agreement. I know that too, he said. I'm agreeing because it's accurate. She looked at him. It was a specific look, the look of a person recalibrating an expectation that has just been addressed differently than the history suggested it would be. Not a large recalibration, a small one, but he saw it. I want to ask you something, he said, and I want you to know before I ask that I'm not working toward an outcome. There's nothing I'm managing toward with this question. I just want to know. She set the coffee cup on the arm of her chair. Okay. Were there moments, he said, after you decided to leave in the house, in the apartment, Here where you reconsidered,
A zip.
where you came close. She was quiet for a long time. The wind moved through the oak tree. Maya breathed on the blanket between them, even and unhurried, the breathing of someone who has not yet learned to be anything other than completely present. Yes, she said, more than I told anyone. She looked at the tree rather than at him. The night you came back from the Meridian, vote the first one, in November, and I called you and you picked up and I asked if you were okay, and you said you didn't know yet. That was one of them. Not fear, not practicality. Something else. He let the silence hold rather than filling it. There was another one, she said. In December. I'd put Maya down and I was sitting in the dark in the nursery and I thought about calling you. Not for any reason. Just because I wanted to tell you something that had happened during the day. Something small. She paused. That was when I understood how much I missed you specifically. Not the marriage. You what stopped you, he said. She finally looked at him. Her expression was entirely honest, in the way that only her most costly expressions were stripped of the diplomatic management she usually maintained, just the thing underneath. Because missing you specifically was not the same as the marriage being workable, she said. And I was afraid that if I called you in that moment, I would confuse the two. I would use the missing to make a decision that should be made on different grounds. A pause. And because Maya was asleep in the other room, and I had promised her, even though she can't understand promises yet, that I would not teach her that love means accepting less than what you're worth. And calling you in that moment would have been the beginning of accepting less. He absorbed this. It cost him something, absorbing it not because it was cruel, which it wasn't, but because it was completely true, and being told a completely true thing about yourself that is also painful is a specific kind of experience that does not become easier with repetition. She's lucky, he said, to have you deciding things on those grounds. Naya looked at him for a moment. She's going to need you too, she said, deciding things on the best grounds you can manage. Grace came to the back door at noon with the announcement that she had made too much food, which was both true and not the whole story, and they went inside and sat at the kitchen table and ate. The conversation found its way, as conversations between parents find their way, to Maya the specifics of her development, the pediatrician's notes from the week before, the ongoing philosophical dispute between Maya and the concept of tummy time, which Maya regarded as a personal affront and approached accordingly. Tejan listened more than he spoke. He asked questions when he had them, real ones, questions he didn't know the answers to and wasn't asking to demonstrate engagement. Grace answered several of them with the precise practical knowledge of a grandmother who has been paying close attention. Nia answered others with the specific fluency of a woman who has spent 4 months becoming an expert in one particular human being. At one point, Grace said, without looking up from her food, "She smiled at me yesterday for the first time." Not the gas smile, the real one. "She's been doing the real one for 2 weeks," Nia said. "I know, but yesterday it was at me specifically." Tyjos looked at Grace's face as she said this, the particular expression of someone who has just been chosen by an infant, and found it more significant than they expected. He recognized the expression because he had worn it himself in the hospital, the first time Maya's unfocused newborn eyes had seemed to settle on his face. "Yeah," he said, "she has a way of doing that." Grace looked at him. It was the first time in 6 months that Grace Caldwell had looked at Taejun without the careful maintenance of controlled distance. It lasted only a moment. Then she looked back at her food and the moment passed. But it had happened. He left at 2 in the afternoon. He held Maya in the front hallway for the ritual of leaving her weight against his chest, his lips against her hair, the way she grabbed whatever was nearest. Today it was the collar of his jacket, and she held it with both hands, with the absolute, uncomplicated confidence of someone who has not yet had cause to doubt that holding on is a viable strategy. He transferred her to Nia. They stood in the hallway of Grace's house, and he looked at his daughter in his wife's arms, former wife's arms, and he thought about all the language that had shifted in the last 6 months. Wife becoming former wife. Home becoming house, marriage becoming arrangement. The specific vocabulary of a thing that changes its nature and requires you to update the words you use for it. Nia, he said. She looked at him. I'm sorry, he said. I want to say it once, cleanly, without anything attached to it. Not as an argument for a different outcome, not as a negotiation. I'm sorry that I built something for 3 years, that didn't have room for you to be my equal in it. I'm sorry I didn't understand what I was doing until it was done. And I'm sorry that understanding it now doesn't change what it cost you. She was quiet. Maya made a small sound against her shoulder, and Naya's hand moved automatically to Maya's back, the press of a palm that was by now pure reflex. I know you mean it, she said. Okay, she said. And then, after a moment, in the voice she used when she was offering something that cost her something to offer, you're a good father. I want you to know I see that. Every Sunday I see you choosing her, clearly and without reservation, and I see what that cost you, and I see you doing it anyway. She held his gaze. That matters. It matters to her even if she doesn't have the words for it yet. He nodded. He went. He walked to the car and he got in, and he sat for a moment before he told the car to go anywhere, looking at Grace's house through the windshield, the front porch, the 2 chairs on it, the window he could see through, to the hallway where he had just been standing. Then he started the car and drove. He drove back to the city the way he had driven up alone, no calls, nothing playing. The mid-Atlantic corridor moved past in the afternoon light, the landscape flat and bare and honest in the way of early spring before the green has fully returned. Everything visible for exactly what it is without the cover of foliage. He crossed into the city as the light went gold. He went to the house. He went to the study. He poured a drink, sat in his chair, and looked at the photograph on the mantel. Naya in the hospital bed, hair damp, face open in the specific way of a person who has just done the most terrifying thing they have ever done and has not yet had time to rebuild the usual architecture. Maya against her chest, dark-haired and new and completely present, requiring nothing of the moment except to exist in it. The space on the left side of the frame where a husband would have stood. He had put the photograph there in January because he had decided that the truth deserved a place in the room where he made decisions. He had put it there so that the empire, the surviving, stabilized, recovered empire, would always have to coexist with the record of the night it had almost meaning nothing. He had put it there so that the photograph and the professional certifications and the alliance frameworks and the financial infrastructure would all have to share the same shelf, so that none of them could pretend the others didn't exist. He was not going to take it down, but sitting in his chair in the late light of a Saturday afternoon, with the drive back from Baltimore still in his body, with Grace's voice in his ear saying she was very clear about that distinction, with Naya in the hallway saying, "You're a good father," he was beginning to understand something about the difference between 2 kinds of accountability. There was the accountability that says, this is what you did, and you must carry it. And there was the accountability that says, this is what you did, and you must become different because of it. He had been treating the photograph as the first kind. He was beginning to understand it had to be both. Not because absolution was available, it wasn't, and he was not a man who reached for things that weren't available. The marriage was over. That was a permanent consequence of a specific choice on a specific morning, and no amount of correct subsequent behavior would unmake it. Naya was not coming back. Grace would maintain her careful distance for however long she maintained it. These were real and they were his. But a man who has learned only to carry the weight of what he did and has not learned to build differently from it, that man has paid the price without gaining the education. And that was a waste of cost that Tae-jun, who did not believe in waste, could not accept. He was going to build differently, not smoothly, not without failure, not in the clean, decisive way that the version of himself he had been for 40 years executed things. He was going to build differently the way all genuine change gets built, by catching himself mid-reflex and stopping, by asking when he would have told, by walking into rooms without the answer already in his pocket, by learning that not knowing was not the same as failing, and that uncertainty was not the same as weakness. Sunday arrived as Sundays arrived now, with the specific weight of a day that meant something. He drove to Nia's apartment. She had been back for 4 days. Maya settled back into the Upper West Side routine. He buzzed the intercom. Her voice came through. Come up. The apartment smelled different from the first time he had been here. 6 months ago, less new, more lived in, layered now with the specific smell of a home that has been inhabited by two people with distinct and strong personalities, one of whom is 4 months old and has opinions about every aspect of her environment that she communicates with the full range of available volume. Naya opened the door before he knocked. She was in her work clothes, which surprised him. It was Sunday. She caught his look. I have a site visit at 2 new project. Riverside, new one. Client in Tribeca. She stepped back to let him in. Maya's on the mat. Maya was on the mat in the main room with a degree of seriousness usually reserved for more consequential activities. She was on her stomach tummy time, which she had apparently made a separate peace with at some point during the Baltimore weeks, because she was no longer registering her objection at full volume, but was instead engaged in the apparently important work of pushing up onto her forearms and looking at the room from this new angle. When Tai-jun came in, she turned her head and found him and held the position, arms trembling slightly with effort, face expressing the profound satisfaction of someone who has just demonstrated a capability to an audience. She started doing that last week, Nia said. Just stays up. Won't quit. He crouched down to her level. That's pretty good. Maya made a sound of agreement, and then, as though the demonstration was complete and she could now stand down, lowered herself back onto the mat with great dignity. Picked her up. She settled against him with the specific fit of someone who has located the exact right configuration, head on his shoulder, her breath warm against his neck. Nyaso watched this from the kitchen doorway. She was making coffee with the fluency of a person who knows her own kitchen moving without looking for things, her hands knowing where everything was. She had reorganized the kitchen in October before she moved in, and it still reflected those decisions. It was her kitchen, her apartment, her life. The Tribeca project, he said. New client or referral? Referral from the Riverside team. They liked the light fixture I agonized over. Was it the right call? Yes, she said. Took 3 months to be sure, but yes. She poured coffee and came into the main room and sat on the couch. How's the organization? Stable, genuinely stable, not managed stable. Difference being, managed stable means the problems are contained. Genuinely stable means the architecture is sound enough that the problems don't have the same leverage they had 6 months ago. She considered this because of the review, and because I've been having different conversations than I was having before, with the members about how decisions get made and who has access to what. He paused. Min Suk pointed out last month that I had been running a structure where the top concentrated too much, that the breach worked partly because Song-ho was so close to the center, because the center was where everything was. He looked at his daughter's profile. He was not wrong. Mia looked at him. That's not a small thing to admit. No, especially to Min Sik. Especially, he agreed. She was quiet for a moment. Is he still bringing the kimchi jjigae on Fridays? He looked at her. It took him a moment to understand the question. Min Suk, not Seong-ho. She had heard him mention it once, months ago, and had remembered. Started, he said, after Shang-ho. I think it was deliberate. Naya looked at him steadily. You have people who choose you, she said. Not because they're afraid of you. Min Suk has been choosing you for 9 years. I know. Do you let him? He thought about this honestly. More than I used to, he said. Less than I should. She nodded. Not judgment, acknowledgement. The specific acknowledgement of someone who has been watching a process and is marking a data point. He stayed 3 hours. They talked about Maya and about the Tribeca project, and about Grace, who had apparently decided to take a cooking class on Tuesday evenings and was approaching it with the competitive focus she brought to everything. They talked about the pediatrician's assessment from the previous week, which had been comprehensive and positive and had included the phrase developmentally on track, in a way that both of them had found disproportionately reassuring. They talked about nothing important for stretches of time that were comfortable rather than awkward, which was a thing that had not been possible in the early weeks of the arrangement and was possible now. When he stood to leave, she stood too. He held Maya one more time at the door, the ritual, the weight, the collar grabbed by both small hands. He pressed his lips to her hair and held it for a moment, and then straightened and transferred her to Nia. And Maya registered the transition with the philosophical acceptance of someone who has learned that transfers happen, and that the people doing the transferring always come back. Sunday, he said. She said he went. The months moved. Spring became summer with the specific aggressive enthusiasm of New York summers, filling the streets with noise and heat and the compressed energy of a city that has been waiting for warmth and is now consuming it in quantity. Taejun went to the apartment every Sunday. He arrived when he said he would. Every time. He left when the afternoon was done, and Maya was ready for her evening routine, and Naya had whatever the rest of her day held, and he did not extend the visits by creating reasons to stay, and he did not shorten them to demonstrate that he was not trying to stay. He just went and came back. Maya learned to sit up on her own in July, which she announced to him on a Sunday by simply doing it no preparation, no warning, just, I am now sitting. Observe with an expression of such complete satisfaction that he laughed out loud, and Nia, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway, laughed too. He was there for that. He was there for the first real reciprocal smile, the one that came back when you smiled at her rather than appearing at random. He was there for the discovery of her own hands, which Maya examined for a full week, with the intensity of someone who has found something significant and is not yet certain what to do with it. He was there, not for everything, not for the 2 a.m. feeds or the Tuesday mornings when Naya took her to the park or the Wednesday afternoons at her mother's. He was there for his part, which was Sundays and the occasional weekday when schedules allowed, and the calls in the evening that Nia had started making not every evening, not even most evenings, but sometimes, when Maya had done something worth telling someone, and Taejun was the right person to tell, picked up every time. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in September. He signed the documents in his lawyer's office with the pen that was in his jacket pocket, which was not a significant pen, just the pen that was there. He signed where his lawyer indicated, and he did not perform anything for the room. The signing felt like the final administrative step in a process that had already been real for a long time, like the last box checked on a form whose substance was completed months ago. He went from the lawyer's office to the 47th Street building. He sat in his office. He did not call anyone. He did not reach for the next task on the list. He sat in the chair at his desk, and he looked at the window, and he thought about October 14th, not the whole day, just the single moment. The phone face up on the table at the Park Meridian. Naya's name on the screen, his thumb moving to the button. He thought about that moment with the specific, clear-eyed attention of a man who has decided to know himself accurately rather than charitably. He had made that choice. Not Duhuan, not the manufactured crisis. Not the gala or the financial irregularity or any of the 18-month machinery. Those had created the conditions. He had made the choice. And the choice had told Nia something true about where she lived in the hierarchy of things he was protecting, and she had heard it clearly, and she had acted on what she heard. That was what happened. He sat with it for a long time, without moving it anywhere more comfortable. Then he stood and he picked up his jacket, and he went home. He stood in the study. He looked at the photograph on the mantel, Nia in the hospital bed, Maya against her chest, the empty space on the left side of the frame that was not going to fill itself, and was not going to be edited out, and was not going to become, with time and perspective, something that looked like anything other than what it was. He looked at it for a long time. He had kept it there as a discipline, and it had served that purpose, and it was going to continue to serve it for as long as it needed to. Not because he was punishing himself, he had examined that possibility honestly, and concluded it was not that. because he was a man who needed accurate records more than he needed comfortable ones. And the photograph was the most accurate record he had of the thing he most needed to not forget. He turned away from it. He went to the window. The city was doing what it did, enormous, lit, indifferent, containing in its 900 square miles every possible version of a human life being lived at whatever volume was available to it. His empire was in it. Nia's architecture firm was in it. Misa was in it. Asleep in her crib in the pale green nursery in the Upper West Side apartment, her hand probably curled near her face in the specific gesture she made when she slept. The gesture he had noticed on the first Sunday. He was allowed to put her down in the crib and stand over her for a moment in the dark before Nia came in. He pressed his palm against the window glass. The cold of it came through immediately September cold, the early cold that arrives before the trees have finished deciding about the leaves, the cold that is both an ending and the thing that makes the ending visible. He held his hand there. He thought about everything that had survived. The empire, yes. The alliance, yes. His position and his structure and the 12 years of constructed power, yes. All of it had survived the device and the photograph and the conspiracy and the censure and the slow grinding work of the months after. He thought about what had not survived, and then he thought about what had been built from what remained. It was not nothing. It was not the thing he had wanted. It was not the marriage and the family and the specific future he had believed in the early months that he was building when he sat in hospital corridors and made promises and held a woman's hand through fear. That version was finished. It had been finished on October 14th, and the months since had been the process of understanding that, accepting it, and building something different from the material that remained. What remained was Maya. What remained was Sundays. What remained was a woman across the city who called sometimes in the evenings when something was worth telling, and a man who picked up every time, and both of them committed, without having signed a document to this effect, to the proposition that the failure of what they had been to each other was not a license to fail what they still were, parents. Co-architects of a life that belonged to someone who had not asked to be born into the complexity and was going to need both of them showing up clearly and consistently in order to build from it whatever she was going to build. He took his hand from the window. He turned back to the room. The photograph was on the mantel. The drink he had not poured was not on the desk. The study was quiet, with the specific quality of a room that has been the site of significant things and holds that significance in its air without announcing it. He was going to be okay. Not tonight. Tonight he was alone and honest and sitting inside the specific weight of a Tuesday in September when paperwork had made official what had been real for a long time. But okay was not a destination. It was a direction, and he was pointed in it. And the distance between where he was and where okay lived was not fixed. It closed by increments. One Sunday at a time, one honest answer at a time, one room entered without the outcome already determined. He turned off the light. He went upstairs. He slept. Outside, the city kept moving with its permanent indifferent roar, containing all of it, the empire and the apartment and the pale green nursery and the oak tree in Grace's yard and the park 2 blocks east where the surveillance photographs had been taken on Tuesday mornings that were now simply Tuesday mornings. Again, and the hospital on the east side where a woman had given birth alone, while her husband was somewhere else being powerful, and the 47th Street building where a listening device had transmitted for 18 months behind a wall panel that now looked like any other wall. All of it, in the city, simultaneously existing. Across town, Nia was awake. Not from his anxiety. Maya had woken at 2 with the specific hunger of someone who does not recognize inconvenient hours. And Nia was in the nursing chair in the pale green nursery, in the particular warm dark of a room she had painted herself, feeding her daughter and thinking about the Tribeca project. The light fixture. The client wanted something warmer than what Nia had specified, and Nia was not certain the client was wrong, which was a more complicated position than the client being clearly wrong, which was what she preferred. She was thinking about this with the concentrated pleasure of a woman who loves her work and is good at it and has created, from a year that tried to unmake her, a life in which the work is hers, and the apartment is hers, and the daughter against her chest is hers, and the Tuesday mornings in the park are hers, and the occasional phone calls in the evening are something shared and none of. Those things require the same hand to hold them all. Maya finished eating. Naya held her for a moment in the dark, her cheek against Maya's hair, in the specific warmth of a mother and a daughter in the middle of the night in the room that belongs to both of them. "We're okay," she said quietly, not to anyone in particular. To the room, to her daughter, to the year that had cost her, and also, in the specific way that hard years sometimes work, given her something she had not known, she was going to need the clear knowledge of what she was worth, and the evidence, lived and daily, that she had been right to act on it. Maya was asleep. Naya put her in the crib. She pulled the blanket up. She turned on the nightlight that made the ceiling look like pale water. She stood for a moment at the crib's edge, watching her daughter breathe in the even, unhurried rhythm of someone who is completely at rest in the world she finds herself in. Then she went back to bed. She slept without dreaming. In the morning, the city would start again. Maya would wake and reach for the nearest person and find her. Taejun would drive across the city on Sunday and buzz the intercom and hear her voice, and walk upstairs and find his daughter on the mat, working on whatever the current project was, ready to demonstrate. And both of them, on their opposite sides of the city, in their separate and genuinely their own lives, would keep building the thing that had no simple name, not a family in the traditional sense, not a friendship, not an absence of history, but something honest and ongoing and sufficient for what their daughter needed, which was both of them present and neither of them pretending that presence was the same as what they had lost. And all of it held together not by a promise made in a courthouse or a ring or a document, but by the simple daily decision to show up. Every time, that was what remained. It was enough.